So it was weird doing this podcast because I found some shenanigans going on and I wanted to do a conspiracy theory. Basically, what I wanted to talk about today in show number 6 was the emergency approval of COVID convalescent plasma from the top. So this came from somewhere. So here's my chart. We're looking at emergency approval of COVID convalescent plasma therapy from the top. We are the Parenteraldrugassociation, connecting people, science, and regulation. This podcast is with Nicholas V. Kapp, PhD, Student Club Advisor for the West Coast PDA Student Chapter. This podcast is given live with a live audience. If the audience can unmute themselves and say hi, that would be great. Typically,
hello.
The podcast, hello. And
Nice to be here.
Hello. So we got about 3 or 4 people. So thank you guys for unmuting yourselves. Typically, these podcasts are about 5 to 10 minutes long, and we'll try and keep it at that time point. We intend to inform and educate a new generation of pharma manufacturers through a discussion of helpful links, stories, and interviews. Help us help you. In the coming weeks, we'll be trying out various ways to inform our listeners to what it takes to work in the pharma manufacturing sphere. We are the West Coast Chapter, PDA Student Chapter, Peritoneal Drug Association. Again, so we're doing a little bit different this week in that we have a live audience. This slide here looks pretty heavy material, but most of our students are going to be audio. We're going to be looking at convalescent plasma. The thing is, this is from the Johns Hopkins website, and we see that no drug has been proved to be safe and effective for COVID-19. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, hasn't approved of any drug specifically to treat people with COVID-19. There's a vast need for treatment that's out there. People who've recovered from COVID-19 have antibodies. Those are proteins in the body used to fight off infections to diseases in their blood. The blood cells, with cells removed from people who've recovered, is what we call convalescent plasma. Plasma is essentially the liquid portion of the blood with the red blood cells removed, with the white blood cells removed. Researchers hope that convalescent plasma can be given to people with severe COVID-19 to boost their ability to fight off the virus and to survive, basically just to survive. It also might help keep people who are moderately ill from becoming more ill and experiencing COVID-19 complications. Convalescent plasma treatment as a process has been around for quite a while, actually over 100 years. I found an article from the Journal of Experimental Medicine saying a comparison between convalescent plasma and non-convalescent plasma in poliomyelitis. And this is from the Journal of Experimental Medicine from September 30th, 1932. And so even back then, we were trying to use plasma as a way to cure diseases that we don't have any drugs for. Definitely COVID-19, we don't have a drug for it. And so we want to try this because it has been around. Convalescent plasma has been a treatment for, I call it the treatment of first resort for over 100 years, from measles to Ebola. Convalescent plasma for people who've gotten over disease is something that we know works because, right, that one person who had the disease got over the disease, so they must have plasma. Now, let's look back at it. Why do we really want to use this? And what about blood products? What is it about blood products that make people think it's a magical healer? And on the slide here, if people are listening audience maybe can't see it, but we use serum in cosmetics. Now, serum is a portion of blood that doesn't have the coagulating factors. So the blood is let to coagulate and then you take off the liquid. But we see a lot that serum is used in cosmetics to promote beauty, to reduce wrinkles and stuff like that. We have our myths. So the blood and blood products are important in many myths. And so I have a little picture of a vampire with very red lips with the blood kind of coming out of theirs. And, as you know, it's really hard to kill a vampire. And so I think this idea of using plasma resonates with a lot of people. It's like, oh yes, let's try that, especially people who aren't in science. Convalescent plasma is consistently used when other therapies basically are not around. And so before we had antibiotics, before we had a lot of the biotechnology that we had today, basically we didn't have anything else, so we'd use convalescent plasma. And in 2014, a number of years ago, the CDC put out a paper on convalescent plasma for Ebola. And Ebola is one of those diseases that may be coming back that basically we don't have any treatment for. And so in 2014, the CDC developed this paper, and some of the same things apply to COVID today. Plasma therapies have an extensive history. We've used it for diphtheria, anthrax. Currently, we're using it for CMV and for AHF, hemorrhagic fevers. It's basically the only drug that we have for some of these. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it works. And so small studies, Johns Hopkins has actually done a big study on this, but no controls have been done. That being said, what are the arguments against using serum? Number one, no good infrastructure to produce and distribute plasma safely with GMP standards, good manufacturing procedures. And so what we say is, while we have a system out there for blood, we don't have one for plasma. And we're going to need lots of plasma going for lots of people if we're going to use this. We need to get it as early as possible and possibly before hospitalization. And so the results that we do have show that the quicker people get this convalescent plasma, the better it works. Plasma antibodies are varied in amounts and type. And so what we see is we get plasma from two different peoples. They may have vastly different reactivities about them and ability to basically prevent the disease. Lastly, is plasma safe? And so again, you're getting this plasma from people. You have no idea what kind of viruses and everything else are inside of those people. And we have a system for monitoring this with blood, but we'll have to do this for the plasma. And secondly, to do the plasma, there's lots of clotting factors in there. And so we know that one of the effects that people have serious effects is basically clotting. And so we're putting people on these anticoagulants, and then we're giving a whole bunch of clotting factor with the plasmid. And then you may not have seen it, but there's a cute picture of a dog. Balto is the dog that delivered serum, not convalescent serum. It developed serum to Nome, Alaska, and he is stuffed, and I believe he's into Cincinnati Zoo, but there's a neat little picture and a little bit of history. What's really interesting, when we look at this system, you're right. If we don't have a therapy, why not use this convalescent serum? Definitely. I have an article from the New York Times, August 19th, and it said last week, and so that was roughly about August 12th, not that long ago, just as the Food and Drug Administration was preparing to issue an emergency authorization for blood plasma as a COVID-19 treatment, a group of top federal health officials, including Dr. Francis S. Collins, Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, intervened, arguing that the emerging data on the treatment was too weak, according to two senior administration officials. And so it looks like plasma was not going to get this EAU, or this emergency authorization usage. And then you don't see it. But then press release from the FDA dated August 23rd, roughly about a week ago. Today, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued an emergency use authorization, EUA, for investigational convalescent plasmid for the treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized patients as part of the agency's ongoing effort to fight COVID-19. This is from an FDA news release roughly a week ago. What we see here, this is an organizational chart of the HHS Health and Human Services. The secretary is Alex Azar, and reports directly to the president. Basically, even though the top scientists said, nah, let's hold off and wait on it, it was a political decision to basically give the authorization. And so is giving convalescent plasmid and EAU sound science, or is this sound regulation? We've had over 67,000 people be infused with the treatment. Over 14,000 physicians are using it, but it's still not clear if it works. Some people talk about if you need to have a statistician to tell you if something works, then, does it really work? Several studies are underway, but really this, a lot of people have really looked at this. And if the results were as fantastic as certain people say, then we really would have seen that. So it's unclear if large studies will actually go on with this authorization that is there. Because again, if you are a patient, do you want to be involved in a study where you may not get the particular drug, or do you want to get the drug? And most people ask that what they want to get the drug. Another thing that's interesting here that we see is a company called Plasma Technologies, LLC, signed a defense contract worth over $750,000 to develop COVID-19 convalescent plasma technologies, according to the announcement from the Department of Defense. And so there are companies that are making a lot of money if this procedure goes through. Another thing that we got to look at when we're looking at convalescent plasmid is this idea of do no harm. I'm not a clinician, but again, one of the things that you do when you're a clinician is you want to do no harm. There are risks and costs that are associated with convalescent serum. It's not a consistent product. Really wouldn't pass muster. It doesn't pass GMP. When you get it from patient to patient, get that serum, it's slightly different. There can be a contamination, or there can be an infection in the material. The logistics, this particular product has a relatively short shelf life, although it can be frozen for a while. And the other thing that you need are lots of recovered people. Right now, we have lots of that, but what happens when this starts work and you get less and less of them? There are costs. Many people are going to need this. We'll be able to get 3 doses from one unit that we can get for one people, but it's still going to cost a lot. So there is something that's affected in there. And then another thing that we have is, do we have something different? One of the reasons that we do not use convalescent serum is because there's always something better. Once we've had time to study a disease and really look at it, we found other things that would work. An example of this, we can make neutralizing monoclonal antibodies. People are currently working on this, but we need to study those. That's relatively new technology, not like the technology convalescent serum. So I end with a cartoon, and in here there's a picture of the White House on top of the objectives in the microscope, and it says political science. And so I want you to tell me, is this politics or is this science? This is Nick Kapp and our audience signing off.
Wow, thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good
Bye-bye,
weekend.
everybody. Likewise.